Robert Glasser. Thank you very much, Mr. Glasser, for agreeing to speak with the Caribbean Media Corporation this morning. And first off, I'd like you to tell us what is the UN's position on the DRR work that some of the island states have been doing so far. You've had an opportunity to hear them report on what they've been doing so far. What's the UN's position as it relates to that?
Well, I think, first of all, there's complete awareness that disaster risk reduction is essential because the island states are experiencing disasters increasingly frequently, and they're obviously devastating. So that's one observation. The second is that whereas a number of states are working to reduce disaster risk, to work on early warning and the like, including at a regional level, while there's been a lot of progress, there's still a long way to go. And the fourth point is the fact that climate change, if we don't get a handle on climate change, this poses such an enormous risk to particularly small island developing states that all those other efforts to reduce disaster risk really become for naught unless climate change is addressed as rapidly as possible.
Yesterday, you spoke about some funding that would be available soon for DRR work. And can you elaborate more on this funding and how countries of the Americas, especially the Caribbean states, can access that funding?
Well, I think there's the usual source of funding, which is from aid agencies and from NGOs that raise money. And it's often easier to raise money to help after a big disaster. Unfortunately, that's probably the least efficient use of money if we want to reduce disaster risk, because what really needs to happen is the money needs to be provided before a disaster strikes so that preparations can be made to support early warning, hardening of shelters, evacuation, a whole range of measures to deal with floods and so on, earthquake standards and building codes. The sad thing is it's harder and harder to get funding for those upfront pieces of work, but there is money available, and particularly with climate change and the climate change adaptation funding, green climate funding, that there are opportunities for Caribbean island states to access funding like that.
But you understand the particular situation that these Caribbean states are in as it relates to their economies, and their economies need to be at a certain level for them to be able to access some of this funding. So is there some sort of help or some sort of assistance that's going to be coming from the UN for these states so that they can, because they really need it, get the funds they need to mitigate against climate change and to help improve their disaster risk reduction management?
Yeah, I think there are a whole variety of answers to that question. One is that, of course, there is funding, and I think there are specific climate change adaptation pots of money that are available and that specifically mention small island developing states. In the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, this global agreement that was reached last year, countries have specifically singled out small island development states for further technical assistance. In fact, it's one of the key provisions. So there is money available, but again, if climate change continues unabated, if we don't radically reduce greenhouse gases, this is like a small Band-Aid on, just a gushing problem. And we have to get a handle on reducing greenhouse gases, or all the rest of that work. Countries will disappear under the waves. It's such a tragic thought. But that's why we need to work in parallel. We need to reduce greenhouse gases and advocate for reductions while we help countries prepare for the climate change that sadly we're already committed to.
And this leads to the other question. Now, the U.S. presidential election race is on, and the Republican nominee, Donald Trump, has repeatedly said that climate change is a hoax. Now, is there any concern at the level of the UN that the little progress that was made in December, well, I shouldn't call it little, but the progress that was made in December in Paris could be reversed on the part of the US should Donald Trump become the president of the United States?
Well, it would be speculation to talk about Donald Trump becoming president of the United States. But from my perspective, and I think most people whose opinions I respect, rely on experts to answer the question, is climate change real? And we've seen that 97% of scientists who work on climate, who are the experts, the vast majority, are absolutely convinced that climate change is happening. There are so many multiple sources of verification of that, from satellite measurements, ground-based measurements, many, many indicators, the particular signature of the pollutants that are linked to climate change and warming, that it's not even a debatable point. So I would hope if any candidate in any election is saying that they don't believe in climate change, it's more about the politics of the election than that they really don't believe that, because the evidence is so overwhelming, and it would just be inconceivable that you could say that this is not a real phenomenon when scientists who are the people, it's about like saying my doctor tells me I have cancer and I don't believe the doctors, and I get 5 other opinions and they say the same thing, you have cancer. So I can deny it if I want to, but it doesn't mean I'm going to live another 50 years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Glasser.
Thank you.